Welcome back. Baring and his men are still in Haye Sainte. The barn is ablaze. The loopholes are being fought over, and the 5th KGL are in desperate need of assistance, stuck out in the open under assault from cuirassiers as they desperately try to make their way towards Haye Sainte. So let's find out what happens now in part 4. So, I say the 5th KGL is in reserve, is in reinforcement, which they are. Von Umpteder's brigade, which is now just a single battalion. The other one was destroyed, the other wasn't. But it's no longer relevant. There were other battalions and brigades in support. None were as close or close enough to Umpteder to really matter. So Umpteder is slowly advancing towards Haye Sainte. What happens is there is actually a cavalry regiment, a squadron, led by a lieutenant colonel, or led by a man who the book calls a colonel. It could have just been a major. I'm not 100% sure. And this colonel, what happens is he attacks the KGL. They go into square. He keeps them in square for a while. They fire a few pistol shots, and then he retreats to a little dip in the ground about 200 meters away. But the colonel actually stays up on the ridge, up on a little hill where he can see the KGL, and whenever they form line again, he discharges them. And he's directing this main assault. So what does our man Von Umpteder do? Well, Von Umpteder turns to a wounded man of the 1st KGL who happens to be in his brigade square, and he turns to him and he says, "You, with the rifle, have a go at that colonel over there." And our rifleman, he's wounded, his left shoulder's wounded, but he's okay, he can handle the rifle. He has one shot at the colonel, misses, and he has a second shot, and he gets him plumb, and he kills the colonel. And with the colonel dead, the squadron is a little bit in disarray, and this allows Umpteder to really make a lot of headway towards Haye Sainte. Remember, Haye Sainte is only like 500 meters in front of the Allied center positions, depending on where you count from. But it's not like it's 2 kilometers away or something. Like it's very close to the Allied center. So Von Umpteder is advancing. What is happening back at Haye Sainte? Well, because Von Umpteder has got so close, he is able to send the light company of the 5th King's German Legion Battalion to Haye Sainte. Baring is constantly, I'm not going to go through it all, but Baring is constantly asking for more ammunition. There is literally no ammunition. It fell over in the cart and was destroyed. So he sends him men. Remember the 5th KGL are redcoats with muskets. The 2nd KGL in Waterloo, in Haye Sainte, have rifles and their green jackets. So these men arrive, and on the way over there, their commanding officer is killed. Their captain is killed of the 5th KGL light company. He's killed by a round shot. It decapitates him, or does him a horrendous injury. And but most of the men arrive perfectly intact, and they're sort of set about the place. The muskets are actually very important because, number one, they still have probably half their ammo has been used, but they still have more ammo than the best of the men. Remember, about 10 rounds a man is what the riflemen are looking at now. But the muskets are also much faster to fire, and they prove very useful on the loopholes. Reload fire very quickly on the loopholes there. And this is still Baring's had 2 horses shot out from under at this point. I should have mentioned that. One, the reins was shot and then the horse was killed. And the second was shot in the leg and had to be put down, and Baring has taken his aide's horse, and he's actually sent his aide off to divisional command to get more horses. And also with ammunition. But he comes back with 200 men of a Nassau regiment. Nassau, of course, for those of you who are into pirates, you'll know that Nassau is actually the home of the Pirate Republic in the 1715-16. It only lasts for like 2 years. I think 1717 it might be. It's not a Pirate Republic at this point. It gets dealt with quite quickly by Woods, British commander. Anyway, we're not talking about that now. Nassau is a Dutch regiment, and the Nassauers saved Haye Sainte. Just like the 5th KGL Light Company, their commanding officer was immediately killed. They wear these uniforms, and they carry muskets. So again, no new ammunition's coming in, but men with sort of depleted ammunition are making, they're substantially increasing the defenders. It's back to about what it started with. So Major Baring is sitting up on his horse, and these Nassauers come in. There's a big cheer, and he looks at them. He goes, "Oh, maybe you saw it too on the photograph." I'm trying to include a picture of them with the piece of equipment that saved Haye Sainte. He gets off his horse, and he goes up to one of the men. He says, "Give me that right now." And the man takes off his pack and he hands it to him. And Baring goes over to the pond that the men have been trying to get water out of with their shakos, and he fills up a field kettle. a little pot, like this. The Nassauers had actually been carrying theirs with them. And he fills that up, and he runs over to the barn, and he starts throwing water on the fire. Some of his officers then immediately notice, including Lieutenant Graham. They also run over and relieve these men of their pots. I'm not sure if anybody actually spoke Dutch, or if the Dutch actually had anyone who could speak German or English. So I assume there was some people there, but there must have been a moment of translation. And seeing their officer running around, officers running was a big deal, especially in like a situation like this. They weren't panicking, but they were moving fast. And seeing their officer get dirty and take action spurred the men of the KGL on. And they basically set up like bucket lines to get water from the pond, and they actually managed to put out the fire in the barn. So that's a huge, that saved them at La Haye Sainte. If that barn had gone up and that fire had spread to the kitchen and the main building, that would have been it. So the men of Nassau, the Nassauers actually managed to save La Haye Sainte with their kettles. The French tried to set it on fire again, it didn't work. So now we get to the third assault on La Haye Sainte. It was constantly fighting, but the third big attack on La Haye Sainte. Oh, something I forgot to mention. When the men see Baring put the fire out, one of the KGL men says this, and this has actually been confirmed by a few different sources. One of the KGL men says, and I quote, "So long as our officers fight, so shall we. We shall stand our ground." So seeing Baring put this fire up was actually very, very inspirational to the men. This is when, in the third assault, is where Lindau has his rifle damaged and his shoulder tough shot off. By now, the severely wounded, there was actually a surgeon in La Haye Sainte. By now, and the French dead were like 1,000 French dead were sort of outside La Haye Sainte. The bodies were getting trampled into the mud. At the end of the day, they actually found a British captain who'd been killed like pretty much just as the fighting started. Completely buried in mud, like he'd been just stomped that hard into the mud. By now, the wounded are actually moved. The wounded who can still fight are moved to the loopholes, where they lay on the ground and with sticks and clubs knock the French muskets as they stick them through. So the wounded actually end up getting actually wounded even further in the defense of the loopholes. This is where Lindau gets hit. There's a Lindemann, Lindau, Lindebur. There's like 5 different Lind things. So Lindau is the one we're talking about. If you read the book, you'll certainly get more of his story. So the third assault, the barn is once again under attack, and the men are down to about 5 rounds of ammunition each. It's not looking good. This includes the Nassauers and the 5th KGL. So they send word, we need reinforcements and we need supplies. And so, I don't want to get this wrong. So the loopholes are being traded back and forth. If they lose them, if the KGL lose any of the 4 major points, kitchen garden, the loopholes, the front gate, and the barn, that's it. If they lose any one of those 3 for any amount of time, they're over. For a war game, you could basically have, like, if the French manage to hold the position for 3 turns, then they win. If they take the loopholes, they can deny the courtyard to the KGL, which basically means they lose the barn and the gate as well. If they take the kitchen garden, the KGL have no escape and have to literally fight their way out. If they take the main gate, then they can stream into the courtyard. If they take the barn, they can stream into the courtyard. So all these positions are incredibly vital. The main gate is actually being opened and people are sniping. King's German Legion is sniping. One of the doors had 80 bullets in it. And remember, of course, you're not shooting at the gate unless someone's there. So this was heavy fire was coming at this gate all day. And so down to 5 rounds a man, they keep fighting, and then they're down to 2 and 3. And eventually they get down to 1 round a man. And the French pull back. The French have had enough. They pull back. If they had kept going, they would have taken it easily. If they come on again, they could have won. But this is the time when the French decide to pull back. Just for a breather, they're going to come on again. But it's about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and the French are they're getting tired. So we look. The Baring looks around, and he sends another rider out to request ammunition and reinforcements. He gets neither. Wellington himself actually rides down close to La Haye Sainte and inspects it. And Wellington's inspection he basically comes to the conclusion that it's undefendable. It's completely indefensible. Also, it's militarily useless. Without ammunition, La Haye Sainte's useless because it's a strong point to defend the crossroads. Without men with ammunition in La Haye Sainte, it's a worthless position anyway. You can just be surrounded and bypassed, so it's not very good. And by now, at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, word has reached von Baring. This is the thing that pushes him over the edge. The Prussians have arrived. All the British now have to do is keep fighting, and the Prussians will catch up. So Baring gets his officers together, and he comes up with Baring is a big honourable man, and he figures that right now it is completely honourable to withdraw from La Haye Sainte. He and his officers all agree, we are going to withdraw. Now, there was a bit of an argument between who would be the last man to actually leave, and our man Graham and Lindau both volunteered to stay behind, among others. There was about 50 or so men that stayed behind. 20 or so, sorry, not 50, 20 or so. And the men at the kitchen garden were ordered to prepare an escape route. They were going to orderly withdraw bit by bit, get company by company out of there when all hell broke loose. The men of the kitchen garden were attacked. Cavalry or infantry, I can't remember. They were attacked. And infantry. They were attacked by infantry. And Baring said, "Scatter and run, scatter and flee. Get to the 5th Battalion Square and get out, get safe." And they did. They got out of there and they got safe. And then Baring basically said to everyone else, "Get out." And so they did. And about 90% of the defenders of La Haye Sainte left, and our remainder stayed behind. Lindau was on the main gate. The main gate got breached, and Lindau and a few other men stormed the main gate and pushed the enemy out and slammed the gate shut again. And the barn came under attack. Lindau defended the barn. He sort of became like a mini corporal at this point. Like, I know he's actually writing it, but there were others who clarified his story that he was actually playing quite a big part. And Lindau pushed the men out of the barn. And then they came through the gate again, and they couldn't stop them. Lindau had like 5 men with him at this point. Lindau discharges a round, kills a Frenchman. Good shooting. Another one comes at him. He parries with his sword bayonet on the end of his rifle, and he takes the Frenchman in the throat. A third Frenchman comes at him, gets him in the gut, and a fourth comes at him. He gets him in the chest, but the man falls on him and actually breaks the sword bayonet. Well, it says breaks. I imagine it bent it. Like, if you bend your sword bayonet, it's pretty much useless. And so he rips the sword bayonet off, turns it around, and uses it American style, like a club. The Americans loved using rifles as clubs or muskets as clubs. You can see a lot of artwork shows them using clubs. I don't know, but it was also a lack of bayonets available to the Americans. That's different. Anyway, so he's clubbing Frenchman. He gets one man in the skull, and then he overswings on another and actually loses his rifle, and he gets tackled. And on the ground, he's wrestling and sort of punching with this giant Frenchman who's wrestling with him. And the Frenchman's companion comes along with his bayonet, and he's looking for an opening to get in, and he thrusts in, and Lindau turns over and he shoves the Frenchman onto his ally's bayonet. And then he gets smacked in the head with the butt of another musket and knocked out. So he took about 8 Frenchmen with him towards the end of this. He was a very brave man. He gets knocked out, and he is now a POW with his gold and his watches and all his other nice stuff. Remember, he wanted to give that to... with everything that he wanted to give to Baring for safekeeping in case exactly this happened. So, again, even though he actually had quite a lot of personal... Not only his life, but his personal value as valuables, like all the loot that he'd risk his life to get, he still stayed behind because, that was what you did. They were stubborn defenders, determined defenders. He was going to hold out to the last man, and it was going to be him. Meanwhile, in the farmhouse itself, the French had come in, and our man Graham is there with about 10 others, including a lieutenant whose name starts with F. I want to say Franklin, but I'm not 100% sure. And Graham and I'll say Franklin. I'll double check his name. Oh, well, I won't, but yeah, whatever. And Graham and this other lieutenant, along with a few other men, defend the actual house to give the German Legion as much time to get out of there as possible, and the other defenders. Graham gets a Frenchman in the gut with his sword. A man then turns to shoot at him, and Graham basically looks at him and says, "Do it, go." And luckily for him, the lieutenant behind him takes him out he sort of knocks it away with his sword, and then gets the Frenchman, kills him. The other lieutenant then attacks another Frenchman who parries the blow and almost is about to kill his mate. So Graham knocks the musket aside and kills him. And so there's a pretty brutal close combat fighting with Graham's wounded in the left hand, remember? And they're brutal fighting. Eventually, the lieutenant assisting him is killed. Was knocked unconscious. I believe he ends up being wounded and captured. Graham is then held by the collar, is grabbed by the lapels by a French officer who says, "This is the dog I saw on the roof." Graham had actually been sort of instructing a few snipers, and the French didn't like him very much. So the French officer's sort of like holding him, very unsporting, as 4 men with bayonets advance upon Graham, who takes this chance to get the hell out of there. He headbutts the French officer. He probably spat in his face too. Spit, distract, headbutt, and of course use the top of the head. I was taught that by an old Irish bouncer, so you know it was true. Headbutt, get out. And he ran. He was actually the last man to make it back to the 5th KGL Battalion Square. And that's where Graham's story ends. Swashbuckling with his sword. They should make a freaking movie about Haye Sainte, because the ending is just so freaking awesome. And it gets better. So you have, Lindau, our plucky hero. He's fighting his way out, wrestling, doing literal action movie stuff, spearing people on their own bayonets. And then Graham's doing his swashbuckling sword tricks. And then he makes it back to the 5th KGL Square. And that's where our story will take off next time, as we look at the charge of the 5th KGL Light Battalion at Haye Sainte.